Okay, there's a lot here, so I'm going to try and keep this short, and we will go over this again on our seminar day. So be sure to write down any questions that you have or questions that come up as you're doing this reading. This is probably one of the most challenging readings that we will do all year. It's about 5 pages long, so it's not short either. So do your best, read the intro at the very least, and do your best, struggle with this reading. You might get something out of it, but if you don't, come to class with some questions at our seminar, and I'll do the best I can to help you wade through this selection from Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness. But here's a little bit of background and a little bit of an explanation of where he's coming from and what his thinking is on the topic of free will, which is what we're talking about right now. So, who was he? Well, he was a French philosopher, the 20th century French philosopher, also very politically active. He was a literary critic, playwright, novelist, did a lot of work in the 20th century, and he would define himself as a humanist. He would argue that human matters are and should be the primary focus, because there is no God, there is no divine or supernatural reality. Therefore, we should be looking at human matters because that's really all there is. And so he had a belief in human goodness and the power for humans to overcome and do good things. Right? So he's intensely atheistic. He's also an existentialist. He's going to argue that human existence is the primary problem of philosophy, figuring out what it means to exist. And this is a school of philosophers who tend to focus on the lived experience of humans. So, what is it to be human? What is it to exist as a human? And the famous phrase will be "existence precedes essence," and that's the focus of the existentialists. Is that existence piece is a given, but essence is not. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. So this selection that you're going to be reading is from a book called On Being and Nothingness. It's a challenging read. Let me tell you what he claims. He does address the problem of free will in the book. It's the focus of the selection that you would be reading. And he will assert that humans are free actors, totally and utterly free. And he says this should not comfort us. In fact, he says that we are actually condemned to be free. This is a scary thing because we are totally and utterly responsible for everything. He says most people will deny that and they'll try and blame some other circumstances or something else, some other cause for their situation. And he says people who do that are acting in bad faith. He says in reality, he believes there's very little that you are not responsible for. He names your own birth, right? You don't choose to be born. And in a weird way, we could talk about this in class on Thursday. He might even say, yeah, you did choose your own birth. And he also talks about something called facticity, right? He says there are certain things that are brute facts that cannot change, but that does not mean that you do not have a choice. And he firmly rejects the deterministic challenge to human freedom that we saw from Laplace. Okay, so how does he do that, right? So let's get back to that existence precedes essence. He says, first of all, it's clear that we exist. We start there. And then what we realize after that is that what it means to be a human is a result of what we do next. So we exist, and our essence is a result of our actions. In other words, it's the result of our decisions, the decisions we make, and we are utterly free to make them. Again, remember, he sees a world that is devoid of supernatural beings, no God, and he thinks science is just as bad as religion. It's just an excuse for not taking responsibility for our own actions. Bad faith, again, is the belief that we do not decide. So if he would say that if we as thinkers say that we are constrained in some way, what we're really doing is trying to hide our decision to interpret our experience in that way. He says we can't be controlled. Causes, motives, those are not things. We exist, and we are therefore responsible for everything. Right? So we have decided that science means something. We have decided to use this method. We have decided that it works. We have decided how to interpret what we see. And you can think about this really literally too, right? We have decided to interpret everything and any meaning, because there is no meaning apart from us. So any meaning that there is in the world, he's going to argue, comes from us. right? And so, in that regard, we are utterly, utterly free. Um, how we interpret the world is totally up to us. We can be in a prison cell and be totally free, right? If we view ourselves as a prisoner, that is because we have chosen to be a prisoner. He will say in the selection that you'll read, if we are in a war, uh, that is our war. We own it. We have chosen that war. We choose everything. Our ability to decide, our ability to create ourselves, is how and why he sees us as being totally and utterly responsible. Okay, so some criticisms. So, what might you say to Jean Paul Sartre? And if you don't understand at this point, write down any comprehension questions that you have. Obviously, I'm doing just a really superficial look at it right here, and we'll talk about it in more detail in class, and you'll get a lot more out of the reading and the video playlist. But you might want to assert the existence of a supreme being. So he's going to assume atheism, and next week we'll discuss a lot of the arguments for the existence of God. And so you might say, well, that answers that, right? That there is meaning apart from the meaning that we might assign. So we might have that power to assign meaning, but there also might be objective meaning. That's one way of criticizing or challenging Sartre and some of these existentialists or from the 20th century. You might also suggest that, well, why aren't the laws of physics facticity? Why aren't some of these scientific discoveries or mathematical conclusions facticities? Why can't they be? Why are they, or how does he argue? You might push him on this argument. How does he argue, or why does he argue that those are different than our birth, right? That we're kind of thrust into the physical reality of the universe. Why does he think that those are our interpretations? What about an argument from ignorance, right? Is he making an argument from ignorance? Is he arguing that just because we can't know some ultimate meaning, that we can't all agree on some objective meaning for existence, that it doesn't exist? Okay, so think about what other criticisms you might have. And again, watch the videos, don't stop with this one, and come up with your own criticisms. And then think about contemplation. What do you think of Sartre's ideas? What do you think of his claims that we are utterly free? What do you think about his statement that if you're denying this freedom, you're living in bad faith? And what about this notion of facticity? All right. So beyond that, what connections can you make between Sartre's philosophy and your reality? What implications do you see for the way we live our lives? He certainly wanted you to see some implications of his philosophy for the way you actually do your life. He did not want this to be just limited to philosophical discussion in classrooms. He thought that this would start political revolutions. Okay, so take a look at the other videos. Feel free to watch more than I put on the playlist, but it's just a good primer on this topic and on Sartre. And do the reading. And I will see you in class for our seminar.